Former President Trump made conscience protections, religious freedom, a priority in his White House. The Biden administration, not so much so. Earlier today, Fox News broke the story that the Health and Human Services Department, HHS, is considering revoking authority the former Trump administration delegated for the Office of Civil Rights, that's OCR, to prevent violations of religious liberty. Now, HHS happens to be next to the Department of Defense, pretty big department, the largest. This is prompting concerns about conscience protection under the present Secretary Becerra. What does this mean in layman's terms? What does it mean to you? How could this affect religious freedom? Here to break it down for us is Roger Severino, who served as the director of the Office of Civil Rights in HHS under President Trump. He is currently senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Roger, welcome back to the program.
How you doing, Tony?
I'm doing well. So let's start right there. What does this mean in layman's terms? Break it down for us.
It is a full-scale retreat from protection for religious freedom at HHS. Now, remember, HHS was the agency that hounded the Little Sisters of the Poor, threatened them with millions of dollars in fines for not providing contraceptive coverage for fellow nuns. They were protected by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The Supreme Court recognized that protection. And when I was head of OCR, we said, this is a problem. This should never happen again. So we instituted reforms to make sure that law and the First Amendment would be institutionalized as a protection. We'd be our own watchdogs in HHS, just like every other civil right. We stood up a conscience and religious freedom division with career professionals to police this right, and they are trying to shut this down and reverse it by stripping it of all their authorities. It is shameful.
So what we're seeing throughout this Biden administration is basically dismantling the firewall protection around religious freedom. But this change in particular in the Department of HHS, isn't this going against what Secretary Becerra promised during his confirmation hearing?
Oh, absolutely. He was a known quantity. He was my main antagonist when I was enforcing conscience laws twice. We found him to be the one responsible for violating the rights of pro-life pregnancy resource centers and also requiring universal abortion coverage, again, for nuns. He cost his state $200 million in Medicaid funds, and now he's the fox guarding the hen house. This is nothing more than retaliation against the same office that found him to be responsible for conscience violations. The irony is just extraordinary. He was a known quantity. Congress asked him about this multiple times, and he promised up and down that things wouldn't change, that he would respect conscience. And his actions to date have proven that to be absolutely false. And if he does this, he will formalize it and make it an exclamation point on the anti-religious regime that we now have in the White House and at HHS.
So, Roger, give us some examples. I know certainly the life issue that you pointed to, care pregnancy centers and other issues like that, but it's much further reaching that. Let our listeners know just how significant this change is.
Sure. The RFRA is a federal law passed in 1993 with bipartisan support that says you cannot burden people's religious faith if you're the federal government. We use this to good effect to make sure that adoption agencies that are faith-based would have an equal seat at the table. They would not have to abandon their religious beliefs to partner with the federal government. We saw the Supreme Court take this case up recently and say, yes, you have a right as a religious organization to be in the adoption space and follow your beliefs about marriage. And we try to institute that protection throughout, not just on the question of abortion or same-sex marriage or any of those. Any question of a burden on religion. You could be a minority religion, you could be Hindu, Muslim, you could be Native American on federal land that's being burdened by some federal regulation. We've seen that if the government does not pay attention to this, just like on civil rights, if you don't have a dedicated unit, then people's religious liberty is going to suffer no matter what your faith is.
So we could once again see the Little Sisters of the Poor in the crosshairs of the federal government.
Absolutely. What they're saying is, don't worry about it. We don't need to have any focus on it. We will abide by the law, which really means just go ahead and sue us, because that's what it was before. Right. They don't see that their obligation starts with the federal government to control itself. And that's what the Religious Freedom Restoration Act does. It says the government cannot, it is a burden on the government to not burden people's religious freedom unless they have a compelling government interest. We saw them try to do this with this sort of inquisitorial boards they were trying to set up in the Coast Guard on the COVID vaccine when it came to exemptions to the mandate for religious accommodation. If you don't have somebody with expertise looking over their shoulder, just like with every other civil right, those rights are going to be violated. But the Biden and the Becerra crew simply does not respect those rights. They're proven that they're going out of their way to take a gratuitous swipe at people of faith and try to exclude them by saying, you know what, sue us. That's the way you're going to defend your rights.
Wow, amazing. Roger Severino, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for filling us in on this breaking news. Good to see you.
Thank you.